Welcome to the Life Giver Marriage Podcast, a place for honest conversation and hope for your military or first responder marriage. This is your host, Corey Weathers, and I'm honored to share this journey with you.
Hi, this is Dr. John Townsend, and you're listening to Life Giver.
Hi, this is Taya Kyle, and you're listening to Life Giver.
Hi, I'm Shasta Nelson, founder of GirlfriendCircles.com, and you are listening to Life Giver. Welcome to another episode of the Life Giver podcast. This is Corey, and I am about to start a series on deployment. And I was talking with my guest, Lizann Lightfoot, who is launching actually a masterclass for deployment. And we're going to talk all about that today. But I was actually with her talking and actually being interviewed by her for this masterclass when it occurred to me, I have never done an episode or a series specifically about deployment. And I cannot believe I have not done that. I mean, this is a military and first responder podcast, and I've not done a series on deployment. So that's ridiculous. And we are going to do it now. So I am happy to introduce Lizann Lightfoot to the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Corey. I'm happy to be here, and I'm so happy to have inspired you to pursue the topic of deployment.
Right?
So much part of our lives that you didn't even think about addressing.
You know, I think it's been I think for a lot of us as military spouses, military families, deployment is so much kind of part of the conversation. But it's such an important topic for us to cover and talk about, and really talk about what does it look like to do deployment well, because there's definitely doing it well. And then I think we've also had days at least, or maybe even weeks during deployments where we've not done it well. And so this has been a huge passion for you. So Lizann, you are part of the Seasoned Spouse. You write a lot. I see your name all over the place. And so I know you have a passion for writing as well. And so what I thought I would do is just hand it over to you and just tell us a little bit about you. I know you've just PCS'd. We were talking about that before we started the interview. And so you are a military spouse. You've been through this, and this is a passion that you have. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So I've been married to my husband for 11 years now. We have an anniversary coming up. And we dated for quite a while before that. So I've been with him through his entire 17-year military career as the girlfriend, as the wife, as the mom of the children. And during that time, we've been through 7 deployments together. He's Marine Corps. 7.
7. I want to make sure everybody heard that. 7 deployments.
Yeah, which I know is not always the biggest number. You know, I'm not one to play the whole Olympics of who has it harder. But Marine Corps deployments are usually 7 to 9 months long. And so they do deploy, depending what station they're at, it can be on a more frequent schedule. And he's infantry, so that's just what we've been used to. And honestly, I didn't think anything unusual about it or really anything strange about it until we'd been to about our third duty station together. No, 4th, sorry. And at that point, I started realizing that a lot of people were asking questions or having concerns about things that I had sort of addressed and dealt with a few years earlier or a few deployments earlier. And I thought, you know, that was so hard going through that at that time. Somebody should be there to answer questions. Somebody should be there to kind of support military spouses and encourage them and get them through deployment. And I finally decided that somebody should be me. And that was why I started the Seasoned Spouse blog and writing. And I'm working on a book as well to just try and encourage military spouses through military life challenges.
I am so glad that you cared enough about this topic and cared enough about military spouses to say that there's room for helping people have the right resources that they need for deployment, and that you're passionate enough to deliver that. And so I'm so happy that you're going to be talking with me about that. 7 deployments is a lot. And, you know, I would say right now, I don't know what the average is, but I will say it's more common than ever that a lot of our families are going through anywhere between 5 and 10 deployments because we've not had a break from war, right? Like the most senior spouses may look back, you know, those that are in 20, 30 years career service, you know, can look back over their lives and say there was a time when there really wasn't war, where there really wasn't deployments. And I would say that our current generation does not know what that's like. It's just deployments and high tempos and a lot going on.
Yeah, my husband joined right before September 11th, and his first deployments were to Iraq, and they were all back to back for a few years there. And I think for a lot of us, that was just normal. Army, Marine Corps, I mean, all the branches were deploying then, and it was nonstop for a few years. And that's when we were married and having kids and just trying to set up our lives. So that's what we got used to for military life. And I think some people coming into it now that might not deploy for a few years or might have a little bit more space in between, deployment comes as a little bit more of a surprise or a unexpected burden that, maybe because of their spouse's career field, they didn't expect a deployment, or they didn't think that unit was deploying and then suddenly they are. So it's a lot to handle and it's a lot to deal with.
So let me ask this, by the way, because your website is The Seasoned Spouse, and I know that's where people will find you on Twitter. You're also known as The Seasoned Spouse on Twitter. So where did the name come from?
So it was something that I was playing with, and when I first started my blog a few years ago, I had been a spouse for about 9 years, I had a little hesitancy calling myself seasoned. That's kind of a military term that you hear older leadership throw around. They're like, where are the seasoned spouses in the unit who have been through PCS moves before or have been through deployments before? And at that point in our lives, like I said, we dated for 7 years when he was first starting his military career, and it just took us forever to get married because of those deployments and because of the Iraq War and everything. So I had been around through quite a bit, and people started coming to me with questions and asking for advice. And they're like, oh my gosh, you've lived overseas. Oh my goodness, you've been through a few deployments before. Tell me how I'm going to do this. And I was like, well, sure, but lots of people know how to do that, right? And they were like, no, I don't know anyone else who's done that. So I figured that there was a place for having a seasoned voice that could share advice and encouragement with newer spouses. And I figured that it was a name and a brand that I would grow into over time. I didn't quite feel seasoned when I started, but I'm starting to feel more and more seasoned by the year. So,
especially after this PCS, right?
Right? It's just like one more notch to throw up there. So it's a name that I'm proud of, but it's also something that I think we all have experience and skills and leadership that we can share. And so part of my site is gathering deployment stories from other seasoned spouses. I'm not the only seasoned spouse out there. And I really like to share perspectives and experience from lots of different military spouses in different branches and different types of deployments so that people can get a very well-rounded view of what they might be able to expect.
Well, I like the name in particular because like you, there's lots of names that are thrown around for those, what we would call our elders, right? Those that have more experience. And so
I don't want to be an elder.
Right. Well, we call like those that we look up to that would mentor us. And so sometimes we call senior wives or senior spouses, that sort of thing. And so I loved that. I love that term seasoned because it doesn't necessarily, it just means that you know, and you've been around the block a little bit and you have something to offer. And I think one of the things that I've experienced in the last year or two, as I've really studied the culture and really had a lot of conversations with people, is that I'll put you and I together in this like one generation, right? But our generation of military spouses are more seasoned than we give ourselves credit for. And I think that's because we've been in these back-to-back deployments and these high tempos or fast-paced tempos, and we've experienced more than it's normal to us. It's our everyday experience. We don't know anything different. Kind of the way that you described when you guys came in, 9/11 happened, and it hasn't slowed down since then, really. And so this is just your normal life. And so I think there's so many listening out there that are more seasoned than they realize. And one of the things that I've been trying to encourage this generation, our generation, who's not, brand new to the military, that if you've experienced even 2 deployments, you're more seasoned. You have more to offer the community than you think you realize. Would you agree?
For sure. And I think that's what I started realizing. Like I said, when we got to that 4th duty station, we were coming back from living overseas. And I had been in, overseas mode for a few years where everybody was going through challenges and everyone was figuring things out on their own and learning a new language and stuff. So I didn't think I had done anything, overwhelmingly special. And then I got to this duty station where a lot of people, this was their first place they had lived. And out here in California, a lot of spouses maybe met their service member in California. So they've never even done a PCS move. This is their first duty station and their first assignment. And it was because of meeting so many younger, newer families that I realized there's a terrible fly in my
It's summer. I have them in my house too. It's okay.
Yeah, I just want to be in my face right now. But anyway, because I was meeting younger families, I realized that no one was really stepping up to hold their hand and lead them as they were new to a unit or going through a first deployment. And I think when we were doing more of those back-to-back combat deployments, we did have more resources, and the FRG or the FRO or the ombudsman was kind of supporting families and offering a lot of free resources and support. And now as we're entering into more non-combat deployments, a lot of the budgets have been cut. Some of that support has been taken away. And so people are left floundering a little bit, trying to sort this all out and figure it out on their own. And I didn't think that that was right. And I think that there is a void that we can't just wait for government programs to fill, or for, the FRG program or the FRO program to fill. Sometimes we need to step up and do it ourselves. So the more seasoned spouses that speak up and share their experience and kindly share their wisdom, I think the more that will do to enhance the military community overall.
So before we get actually into this whole conversation on deployment, just to kind of, I relate so much to what you just said. And I know at our first duty station, in our first deployment, it was another seasoned spouse that actually said to me how beneficial it is to actually get involved where you can. And that was during that season where there was a lot more support and funding and programming and all of that. But one of the things that she said that really still drives a lot of what I do today is, and I wish I could say it in the exact way that she said it, in her Southern drawl accent too. But she basically said, if you don't like the way that something is going, if you don't like the way somebody else is running it, or if you don't like the way something is being handled, then become a part of it and be part of the change. In other words, be part of making something better. Don't just sit back and complain about it. So instead of sitting there and going, I wish that there was programming, or I wish that there was a way, or I wish that they were helping us, it's people like you, Lizann, who are stepping up and going, you know what? I see a gap. I see a void. I see a need. And I have more to offer than I even realize, especially when I see other people asking questions that inside I feel like I have the answer to, or at least have some wisdom to share. So I'm so excited about what you're doing with the masterclass. And so why don't we dive in and talk a little bit about why deployment? Why did you feel like that was where you wanted to start with developing a masterclass? And then absolutely feel free to talk about the masterclass itself and what you're hoping it will do for other military families.
Sure. So I chose deployment partly because when I started writing my blog, my husband was deploying again. So in the last few years at our last duty station, he did two, not necessarily back-to-back deployments, but 2 deployments in 3 years. And we knew that, and it was expected. And to me, they weren't really a big deal because they were his first non-combat deployments. So I was kind of laid back about it. But for a lot of spouses in our unit, this was their first experience, or maybe even if they had been through deployments before, it was their first time with kids, or their first time living far from family, or their first time with any other challenge that you can think of that you didn't face in a previous deployment, and now they were having to deal with that. And so I realized that part of the challenge of deployment, so much of it is emotional and psychological, that it's just this kind of big bad unknown, and it's scary. I mean, like I said, no matter how many you've been through or what your spouse's job is, whether or not you're actually afraid for their safety, deployments are still this huge intimidating thing that really affects your life for a long period of time. And so I thought that I don't have all the answers. I can't tell everyone exactly how to get through every single deployment, but I can at least offer some encouragement, and I can at least offer, a listening ear, and also kind of that shoulder to cry on and say, I've been there too. We've had bad days. I've been through tons of challenges, and I have not always handled them in the most pretty manner. So it's okay to have those bad days and have those challenges, and you're going to get through it. I got through it. All these other people got through it. And I think the more that people hear that, the more confident they feel in themselves, and they say, you know what, I can handle this deployment, and here's how I'm going to do it. So my approach to handling deployment, I kind of have created a 3-pronged deployment masterclass. And people can participate in 1, 2, or 3 of the different options, depending on what seems to be most helpful to them. So the first thing I created was a free Facebook support group, basically. And it now has 900 spouses from all over the country, all different branches, lots of National Guard and people who are not quite connected to an actual unit. They're not getting support from a base or a post or a central location. They're coming to this group and they're asking their questions of, where do I find this? Is there a good place to do this? What about my toddler? This is their first time. Where are the other toddler moms out there? And it has just been an extremely encouraging and supportive and helpful group. There's questions going up every day, and I do carefully moderate it to make sure that it's all military spouses and all of the drama is maintained and there's no negativity in the group, because that's really important to me, that it's a supportive environment. But that group has been going on since March, and it has just grown tremendously, and I'm hearing wonderful feedback from people that that's their favorite group on Facebook during a deployment. And now some of the people who initially started with us are reaching the end of their first deployment. And I wasn't sure at first how I'd feel about posting homecoming photos and videos for, a group of people who are facing an upcoming deployment. But so many of them, instead of bragging or anything like that, have just been like, guys, you can do this. We got through this, and I have so much encouragement for all of you. And I just want to let you know you're going to get there too. And that has been, I think, just a tremendous resource. And so that's free for anyone. They can find the links to it through my website. And it's just a resource that I want to offer the military community to help them help each other. But beyond that, I think sometimes we get intimidated by kind of the nuts and bolts of deployment. And especially when you're facing a long one or one that's coming up quickly that you haven't had a lot of time to plan for, you have all these questions about, what are the things that I absolutely need to do to prepare? And do we need a budget? And do I need emergency forms? And what would happen to my kids if something happens to me? You have all these what if scenarios going through your head. So I created a deployment guide, which is a 28-page downloadable printable guide. People can reuse it. They can put it in a binder. They can write on it, do whatever they want to personalize it and put in the information that's relevant for their unit, for their deployment. And it covers a huge variety of things. The first section is kind of on those emergency nuts and bolts preparation that you need for deployment. But the middle sections are a lot of brainstorming and lists and encouragement for things like making a bucket list of fun things to do during deployment, and Bible verses to encourage you, and how to do some meal planning and exercise routines during deployment. So it's just a fun kind of journal, but I'm calling it a guide. And it's just to be personalized and used in whatever way is going to be most helpful. And I think the more that people feel organized and prepared and have everything together in one place, the more confident they're going to feel. So when the washer breaks or the kids get sick or whatever is going to happen.
That happens, right?
It does happen every time, right? That when that comes up, I can't have a page on here's the day your washer is going to break, but I can have a page on did you write down a phone number for a handyman to call? Or do you have a friend that's home during the days that you could, call to watch the kids in an emergency, that type of a thing. So that's all in there. And the more I think that people prepare ahead of time, the more they're just going to be able to take a breath and say, okay, I'm going to handle this one today, and let's see how we're going to do it, because I've had to do that so many times. And the more phone numbers that you have, the more preparation you have, the better it's going to feel.
And so you have a third one. You have a third prong to this.
Yes. So the third part is the actual deployment masterclass. And that's what I'm currently creating and building. And that's what, Corey, I was honored to have you as a guest speaker and we've compiled a video a few weeks ago that I'm editing and preparing. And so the Deployment Masterclass is a collection of video interviews from a variety of military spouses, seasoned spouses, if you will. And they're talking about some of those deeper deployment topics, because it's one thing to have a guide of, here's a friend I'm going to call on a bad day. But I realized that there's a lot of, I think, emotional insecurity that goes into deployment, a lot of second guessing, a lot of doubting, starting in the period before deployment, because sometimes there can be a lot of tension and frustration in your relationship with your military spouse. And people want to know, is that normal? Is this part of deployment, or is my spouse really having marital issues, and are we okay? And that continues, I think, all through deployment. There's these different challenges that come up with communication, with kids. There's a lot of times that half the questions that we get on the Facebook page, it seems like people are asking, is this normal? Is this okay? And they want to know what's normal for deployment. And so I felt like it was important to talk to people in these videos that would give a little bit deeper, more sincere answers and get into some of the parts of deployment that we don't always talk about, that are glossed over. And the answers that, when people are really feeling down and frustrated, usually the pat answer is just keep busy. Everything's going to be fine. Just keep busy.
Do you like that answer, by the way?
I don't.
I don't either. Every time I've heard it, I've just kind of cringed a little bit, but I've never wanted to say anything to anybody, because maybe there was a part of me that was going, well, maybe there's something I don't know. Maybe, I know I have experienced staying busy to a certain degree during a deployment and seeing how, I know that what they're trying to say is don't have tons of idle time where you're just sitting around waiting for your service member to come back. And I understand that. But there's another part of me that feels like that can be an unhealthy answer.
I agree. And for the same thing, I think that when you're giving a short Facebook response, it's an okay answer. But when you're actually trying to help someone to take a step forward and make a difference in their life, when they're telling you, this isn't working, we're only 1 month into a deployment and this is not working for me, and I've got a long stretch ahead, what do I do? They're asking for help, and giving, I think, a 1 or 2 sentence answer like that does not actually help people. So I did a whole interview with Judy Davis, who I know that you know, and she talked about that exact issue of, what do we actually mean when we say keep busy during deployment? And what are some better ways to handle yourself, or to get out of depression and get out of idle time during a deployment? And she had some really great insight. So all of my guests have spoken on these more serious, more sincere topics and have given amazing feedback. I'm just so impressed by some of their viewpoints and their perspective and what they've learned over the years. And I'm really happy to be able to share that with our viewers.
So I'm so excited about this masterclass coming out. I think that you're right. I think that it's definitely filling a need that is out there. When you do a search on deployment or struggles with deployment, I mean, there is content as far as written content, but there's not a lot of content, or at least there hasn't been before this, a lot of content that takes care of these different layers that I think that you're addressing. Because you're right, there are those nuts and bolts, basic things that give us a kind of peace of mind that I have the information and I have my life organized. But you're right, then there comes all of the insecurity. There comes a lot of the deeper issues, the deeper questions about your marriage, about your own confidence and your ability to get through things, what I've been lately wanting to call grit, and where that comes from too. Like those are those deeper questions. So I'm so glad that you're doing that, and you're going to be offering it soon. And probably by the time this comes out, you should be launching it for sure. So do you have a date yet set?
Well, it was supposed to be in August, and then we suddenly had to move. So I did need to push it back a little bit, but I'm still planning to launch by the end of August. I just have to work out some technical.
So that would be August of 2018, just in case somebody is like in 2019 just now listening, right, to this interview. Just in case.
2018, this month, I'm planning to tie all the ends together. People can already sign up for the masterclass, and at that point, they will have access to the free Facebook group I mentioned, and they receive the deployment guide as kind of your workbook or your notebook for the masterclass. So those options are both available immediately. It's just this portion with the videos that I need to do some more editing and pull everything together. So I anticipate by the end of August 2018 that we will have a fully ready deployment masterclass.
Awesome. So exciting. So I actually want to ask you, you talked earlier about having some of the younger spouses, the newer spouses, they may not always be younger, but the newer spouses coming in that maybe had a little bit of that insecurity, their first deployment. What would you say are some of the most frequently asked questions that you get when they're going into a deployment and they're asking for mentoring?
So a lot of them are in the pre-deployment stage, which I can relate to because I also have a tremendous amount of girlfriends and fiancés in the group. And I have a special affinity for them because I was a girlfriend for 7 years, which was his first 3 deployments, I think. So I went through his first combat deployments to Iraq kind of alone, and I was at college and I didn't have any connection to his military unit. I didn't even know that there was email lists. He might have known, but he just didn't even think to put me on them. So it wasn't like I was purposely excluded. It's just that the support didn't exist. And I remember doing Google searches and I'd find websites for military spouses, but I was very aware that I was not a spouse yet. And I didn't know if I was welcomed in the community or not. And so I've always made an extra effort to be very welcoming of younger girlfriends, fiancés at any stage. No matter whether or not you're married to your service member, you're going to miss them during a deployment and you're going to struggle. So I do see a lot of questions from that time when they first learn about a deployment, kind of just the overwhelming, oh my gosh, what do we do? Sometimes it's practical questions of like, should he take a phone? Should he not? What apps do we use to communicate? But other times it's just the emotional overwhelm of, we've never been apart. How are we going to do this? I need to talk to someone else who has been through it before. And then as we go through deployment, we do see a lot of questions about communication. And in this technical age, I think there's some pros and cons of all of our communication options. And so sometimes during deployments, people have video availability regularly, which is really cool. That was not our experience the first few deployments. And we did finally get to experience on his most recent deployment. It was totally different. And it has its own benefits, but it can also bring its own frustrations of needing to be in constant communication and then worrying about them when they don't check in and all of these other things that back in the day when I only got 1 phone call a month, I mean, that sounds horrible now, but that was normal and that's what everyone was going through. And there was really nothing that you could do about it. And you could worry, but worrying didn't help anything. So we just kind of went through it. And now I think with more phone calls and emails and videos, there's more opportunities to read into things or to worry about the service member.
True. I didn't think about that.
Or to think that the service member is not the same and they're disconnecting and they're not acting interested and all these types of things, which I think for the most part, I can't answer for everyone's marriage, but for the most part, those are all a normal part of deployment. When the service member is in the zone and in deployment mode, they might not talk to their spouse and their family members the same way, and they might not want to. And I do see a lot of frustration with that, people asking, what does this mean? Is this normal? What should I do about it? And as a group, we can kind of share collective experiences. We can't, like I said, give marital advice or solve anyone's problems per se, but we can kind of tell them, that's what happened with us. And I think that happens a lot. And here's some ways to get through it.
So I think you're right. You made a comment about your Facebook group and how many people are seeking out those deeper questions. And don't you think that a lot of the support that we need to offer each other is a lot about you're going to be okay? Like, don't you feel like deep down inside, whether it is the washer that's falling apart or whether it's how are we going to get through the lack of connectivity or conversations or what we would normally do as a couple, that it's just this underlying question of, are my kids even, are we going to be okay?
Yes, I think that is a huge part of what people are looking for, is just, they kind of want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. They want to see someone who has been through a similar situation. And that's why I've worked so hard to collect all branches and people from all over the country, because I can't speak to a National Guard deployment. I haven't personally been through that. But in the group, there are tons of National Guard spouses who can say, hey, we live 3 miles from the closest military, or sorry, 3 hours.
3 miles.
3 miles would be nice. But people who are like, hey, we are hours from any military base, any other family, any unit event. And here's how we've gotten through it. And then we've got spouses that have been through combat tours, and they can say, you know what? Yes, I worried. Yes, it was stressful, but he came home and it's going to be okay. And then you've got people with kids of all different ages who can say, yeah, those tantrums and those not sleeping times and the kids talking back, those were all really rough. But you know what? It's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So I think the more that we can collect those successful, encouraging stories of people admitting, you know, it's not always pretty. It can get pretty hairy at times, but it's going to be okay. And people need to hear that again and again. They need to be reminded that there's nothing special about me. I don't have superpowers. We got through those deployments because we had to. And everyone else that is joining this group or viewing the deployment masterclass, they all have the exact same inner strength and capabilities and possibilities that I have. So if I can do it, if these other hundreds of spouses in the group can do it, then they can do it too.
Well, I think about what you were saying about the Facebook group where they were sharing the videos of homecoming videos and whether or not that was helpful or encouraging or not. You know, you were a little bit at first worried about that. But I think I remember going back to maybe it was after the first deployment when I realized, you know, there are these certain big milestones that we experience in our life. Our, you know, high school graduation is one of those, or your wedding day, or, you know, we have these big milestones that happen and the calendar keeps moving, right? The clock keeps ticking. And I think that when you're able to see that someone else's homecoming day arrived, right? That, you know, those days that feels like this deployment is lasting forever and it's never going to end, that being able to see someone else's, you know, that their calendar eventually got to that day and then past it, that we have to remind ourselves that there will be a day where we're going to be looking back on this deployment as it being done and over. Right? Sometimes we just need that encouragement to know that you may be in the middle of it, but sometimes the best work, the best stretching, the best character growth happens when we're in the middle of stuff. And we may find ourselves crossing that finish line and on the other side of it, looking back going, wow, I love who I am and who we can be as a family now that I can look back and see that I grew through all of that. So I like the fact that they are sharing those welcome home ceremonies because it really is, I mean, there always can be that little bit of, oh, I wish that was me, and oh, that looks amazing, and mine's lasting forever, and all of that. But I think it's also going, I'm going to get to post my video next, right? Or soon it'll be my turn.
Yes, and I think that's a big part of it. Another thing that I see pretty often is people talking about how if they are, especially when they're girlfriends and fiancés, or if they've chosen to move home and be surrounded by family during deployment instead of staying closer to a military base, then a lot of times they don't get that support or understanding from family members, and they just want a place where they can vent a little bit and talk to other military spouses who get it. So when they say, you know what, I haven't had a phone call for 2 weeks and my cousin is telling me that, oh, my boyfriend is leaving overnight and I'm going to be so sad. Ah, that's so frustrating. Who else can relate? And then, of course, many people in the group can relate because we've all had those types of conversations where we've had to bite our tongue or sort of look the other way, or a well-meaning coworker that just says the complete wrong thing, you know?
Bless him.
Right? So I think being in an environment like that, where you can say, guys, it's almost my homecoming day, and that entire community understands exactly what you mean and exactly the emotions that are going into that. Whereas your family and your friends back home, just even if they're trying, they might not be able to relate. And sometimes the feedback for them is going to fall a little bit flat and not meet, your needs. I think being in that community of military significant others, military spouses, that you can have a bad day, you can vent about it, and no one's going to think that, you're breaking up your marriage or something. And you can talk about struggles that you're having with your kids, and no one's going to judge you as being the world's worst mom. Whereas I think in a lot of our communal Facebook groups, we would be afraid to share those type of details because of the feedback that you might get.
So let me ask you a couple of tough questions, right? So I know you can give that look like, oh no, what does that mean? Because I did not give Lizann a list of questions before we started this. I am a huge believer in organic conversation. And so let me ask you a few tough questions, and I'll join in with you on this discussion. Because I think a lot of the people who are listening who are really looking for some wisdom when it comes to maybe they're going into a deployment, maybe a deployment's on the calendar, or maybe they're in the middle of a deployment and they are feeling that insecurity. I think that a lot of times they are looking for those answers, and maybe not the specific us as seasoned spouses telling them exactly what they should do, but at least giving them wisdom as they're kind of coming up with what feels right for them and their family. So maybe you and I can have a little bit of a seasoned spouse conversation and talk about some things that you've learned that you can maybe pass that wisdom down to those that might be just wanting to hear kind of both sides of maybe some decisions that they're trying to make. So I think a first question that I would throw it out to you is, let's say that there is someone listening who is in the middle of a deployment and they're exhausted. Maybe they have small children. You have 4 children, you said, and they're just exhausted and they're feeling like they just don't know if they can get through this. What would you say to them?
First, I'd say, yes, it is exhausting. I get that. I've had babies during deployment and toddlers, and being nonstop responsible for younger ones when you're the only adult in the house, it is mentally draining. And it's okay to admit that. But I think when you reach that point, if it's the middle of the deployment and you still have a ways to go and you just feel like you're done, it is the end. First of all, it's okay to have a bad day. And I've had plenty of them where I am depressed, or I am tired, or I am just not feeling like doing anything that day. And that happens, but I try very hard not to let that turn into a bad week or to eat up, a huge chunk of the deployment. You have a bad day, you get some extra sleep, and you move on. And if you're not able to break that cycle, and if it seems to be one bad day after another, or you've just been in a slump for a week or so, then I think it's time to really look seriously at your routines, because something is not working. And you've got to find a way to make it work for the rest of the deployment. And I tend to get into those places where I just kind of spin my gears and, want to beat my head against the wall until something does work. And I have to remind myself to step back and make a change. So if something isn't working with the kids, then maybe I need to either change our discipline tactics, or change their chore responsibilities, or change their schedule, whatever age they are and whatever seems to be the sticking point. Something has to give, and the kids aren't going to change. So I have to be the one to do that. And then with me also, if I'm feeling completely drained and exhausted, then that's when we start talking about self-care, and that idea that if you're not taking care of yourself, then how can you possibly take care of others? And so if that means hiring a babysitter and just getting out of the house for a couple hours, you probably need that. And that is okay. And you have my permission to hire a babysitter for an hour or two. Maybe you're just really behind on housework and you're feeling overwhelmed and, depressed at your own messy house. It's okay to hire help. When I had my 4th kid, I hired a maid, and I felt a little weird about it at the time because I'd never done that before. And we're not a fancy family that usually has maid. But I absolutely needed someone just to clean the bathrooms and clean the kitchens and make our house at a safe level of sanitation, because I was just barely keeping up with laundry. I could either do laundry or I could clean, but I couldn't do both. So something had to give, and I had to hire someone to come in for just one day a week, a couple hours, to help me manage the house. And that was life-changing, and it was great. So sometimes I think during deployment, when we are stuck in a rut and just feeling like we can't do it anymore, then you need to take a step back and just think, what can I do differently? How can I get help? You don't always have to pay. Sometimes you can ask a friend to watch your kids, or sometimes you can trade babysitting with a friend. You can ask other people, and people are often very willing to help. You just have to make that step to ask them.
I so love everything that you just said. I think it was during my first deployment that I love that you said paying attention to routine and that sometimes things need to change. I remember there was a point where I realized during the first deployment, because I was almost like I kept finding myself in a place where I was in a funk. And then I started to realize it was almost like a pattern. And then I realized, wow, when I've not, because I had toddlers at the time, and so I know I wasn't sleeping great. And so I remember this moment where I realized on the 5th day, so if I had not slept well after 4 nights, it was always the 5th day that I just was in a funk and couldn't get anything accomplished. And so once I realized that, I just realized, okay, you know what? It's okay for me to take something that's safe over the counter that just helps me get a deeper sleep, and to be able to go, you know what, one that I could still hear the kids if I needed to, hear the kids and get up, but being able to have, okay, I know for sure that my line is that 5th night. So that 5th night, I desperately am going to have to find a way to get a good night's sleep somehow. Right. And that translated even into the reintegration when I was able to communicate that with my husband and go, it's been 4 nights. You're not going to like who I am tomorrow. Right. So I really need your help. Like I really need 1 night of good sleep and then I'll be back on track again. Yeah. And I used to always say to myself, what you said about re-examining when things aren't working with the kids and the kids are like shifted all of a sudden and they're not listening to you or something's not right. I think it's so easy for people and for parents, especially of young kids, when things start to go chaotic and you've been doing the same thing, like you've had the same structure, you've had the same discipline, and all of a sudden it's not working. I hear from so many parents that they go, what's wrong with me, right? What am I doing wrong? What's going on? And you said it perfectly that oftentimes it's that the kids are ready for the next level up, right? They're ready for that next set of chores, or they're ready for a different kind of discipline that they weren't capable of before. It's not always a poor reflection of you. It's really just kind of that developmental stage that's progressed. So I love the way that you said that.
Thank you. It's been lots of eye-opening experience. My kids, we've been through all different ages now. The oldest is 10, so I can't speak to the middle schoolers and high schooler experience. But we've been through deployments with every age, I think, from about 0 to 10, and different challenges every step of the way. Especially
with different personalities as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you an opportunity to answer the question that we were talking about before, which is, when other people are saying, how do you get through a deployment? And other people answer, just stay busy. What is the answer that you would rather give?
So I like to focus more on goal setting than on actually staying busy. And this is something that Judy Davis and I talked about in her video interview for the masterclass. The idea that it's okay to stay busy, but that busyness should be fulfilling and meaningful to you. It should not just be, oh, I should do this thing because I have nothing else going on, or I should do this thing because someone else said that I should. Instead, I like to look at deployment, especially when we have some advance notice, and my husband's deployments have been fairly predictable. So we often know a year ahead of time that there's going to be training, and then he's probably going to deploy in this month, and it's probably going to last this long. So I have a lot of time to anticipate and plan. And I know not everyone gets that, but for us, I usually set some short-term goals and some long-term goals throughout the deployment of, here's one big thing I want to accomplish. And it's something that fulfills me. It's something that is exciting to me. It's not going to be a chore. It's not going to be a hassle. It's going to be something exciting that I look forward to. And it might be a new hobby. I think when I was younger, one time I learned how to play guitar, and I thought that would be a neat thing to do during deployment. And then I think his most recent ones, I was working on my book. And so I accomplished writing a certain amount of chapters of my book, which was fun and it was fulfilling. Lots of people set weight loss goals, which can be great too, especially if you start seeing those results and that becomes exciting and motivating. But I don't like to get too bogged down on a particular number, like I will lose 20 pounds this deployment, because then, what if you only get to 15? What if you get to 18? Are you going to beat yourself up over that? So I talk a lot about setting realistic goals and setting fulfilling goals and kind of having those bucket lists of, I've always wanted to go here with a friend. And that's not something I do with my husband. But now that he's away for 7 months, that's a trip that I could plan or a thing that I could look forward to and enjoy doing with some friends. And it doesn't mean I like my husband any less if I'm enjoying the surrounding area around our base, but it means that I'm finding things that are exciting and fulfilling to me. So if those are the kind of plans that keep you busy and keep you engaged and get you out of bed in the morning, then those I think are absolutely good ways to stay busy during deployment. But just, throwing a bunch of Pinterest projects at yourself because you've seen other people do it, I don't personally get a lot of reward from crafting and from Pinterest. And so
Neither do I. I can't even decorate a table to save my life.
I'm not the wife that does the fancy homecoming signs and the nice care packages. So for other people, if that's their thing, if they want to focus on one decorated care package a month and that's fun for them, that's cool. For me, that's not really fun. That feels more like a chore. Mm-hmm. So I would absolutely encourage people, find your things that are going to motivate you. Find things where you can measure your success, one care package a month, 5 pounds a month, or whatever you can track and measure and feel accomplished about. I think you're going to feel more and more confident in yourself and discover your own talents and discover your inner strength. And that's going to carry through facing a lot of the deployment challenges.
So let me ask you another question, because I know that you brought it up earlier, there might be somebody out there that is really weighing the pros and cons of what they should do with them. Maybe even if they have kids too, maybe it's their first deployment. I get this question thrown towards me a lot, which is the topic of geo-batching, or in this case, like you mentioned, returning back home to stay with family during a deployment. So if there's somebody listening that is facing a deployment and they're trying to make that decision, should I stay close to the installation or should I go back home? I know this is a tough, almost controversial question for me to ask you. So I'm going to answer it too. So we'll both kind of throw our kind of 2 cents in. But what is your typical response if somebody is trying to figure that out?
Yeah, I do get that one a lot too. And I think I actually created a video about it last year. And honestly, my response was that it really depends on the person and it depends on their situation. So I can't give a blanket answer of which one is better, because it really depends on whether or not you have kids, your relationship with your family. Will you have a community where you're living? Are you going to have a job? All those kinds of things. It depends so much on the person. So for us, I mentioned that his first few deployments, I was a girlfriend and I stayed put where I was. We actually delayed getting married for years. Mm-hmm. It was my choice, not his, because I wanted to finish college and then I had a job that I loved and I was living near family. And I said to him, you keep deploying. There is nothing for me out at your base, which to be fair was 29 Palms, California. And that is, in most people's opinions, one of the most desolate Marine Corps bases that we have. So
that was an accurate statement then, for the most
part. Right. I wasn't just making up and being hard. It's a small base in the middle of a desert. There were no job opportunities there. I didn't know any people there. So for me, at that point in my life, the right thing to do was to stay put where I had job security, where I had support and community and family and friends nearby. What I lacked when I did that was the connection to the military unit. And at that time in my life, I didn't know any other military spouses or girlfriends, so it didn't really matter. But now, especially since we've had kids, I've had the complete opposite experience. I actually gave birth on my own during one of our deployments because I didn't want to move back home near family with a toddler. Well, I had 2 toddlers, really. 2 toddlers, and then had a baby during the deployment. I thought my parents offered for me to come back and live with them and, give birth at a local hospital. And to me, that was going to be more uprooting and frustrating, especially for the toddler routines and such, that it was better to just stay put at our house, give birth at the local hospital near the base. And I had family come and visit and help me out. And I did have friends come and help me out too. But that was a choice that I made that I think was the right thing to do. So I think it just depends so much on you and your kids and your own situation. And also I encourage people to be realistic about their relationship with their families, because especially for some younger spouses that have moved away from home, married their service member, and maybe it's been a couple years since they've been back. Sometimes they think going back home is going to be like going back to high school and like, oh yeah, all my friends will be there and it's going to be great and we're going to hang out. But you really need to consider the reality that, you know, are you going to have a job or aren't you? Are your parents working or are they available to help you? Are your friends working? Are they even still living in the same town? You know, there's no way to ever step back in time. So you have to be realistic about what is the current environment and situation at your home and in your hometown, and not just have these idealistic views of, sure, it'll be fun, everyone's going to hang out with me all the time.
Mm-hmm. Such a wise answer. And I love the fact that you've experienced that in different ways. Like I appreciate that you've experienced that as a girlfriend and staying home and making that wise decision for you at the time. And then I also appreciate that there was another time where you said, no, this is best for me to stay, even though it's going to be hard. And honestly, I don't even know if there's anything that I could add to that answer. It was just such a beautifully well done answer. And it's usually the answer that I give as well, that it does depend. I think the only thing that I usually say is I just don't want people to don't make the decision, whatever your decision is. I would hate for you to make the decision to go home because you're afraid to do something tough. Right. Sure. That would be the only thing that I would say if there was a clear, like, I would almost rather see, and then we have to define what is tough, right? Like if you're going through like some medical scare that you really need to be surrounded by good medical care and good support and family support and all that, that's a different kind of tough, right? But I do have some people that send in questions that one of the things, the main thing is that they're just scared, that they've never been through a deployment before, that this is all new for them, especially if they've just moved to an installation, and that even if there is support, that it's just the fear of going through that and thinking that you're not going to have that support. And so you're right, it's such a tough answer to give, but I would definitely encourage those that don't have like very big, huge reasons that make a lot of sense as to why you should not try to get involved with the supportive community. I definitely would encourage that if you can, because there is some element, very much the way that you described the Facebook page, there is great encouragement to be around those who are going through it, even at the same time. You know, some of my best friendships came out of going through that experience with them together, and it was us relying on each other. And so had I gone home just to avoid that, I would have missed out on really great relationships and a different level of support and friendship that maybe you've never experienced before. So I'm not sure what you would say about that, Lizann. Anything different?
I hear that sometimes from people who have chosen to go home during deployment, and it pains me when I hear the regret that they say, I wish I hadn't, either because, you know, my family's not being as supportive as I thought they would be, or my friends are all busy and don't have time for me, or they see other spouses and girlfriends near the military base or from that same unit kind of bonding and planning events together and, you know, just doing girls' night outs or whatever. And they feel left out of that community, and they feel like they're getting the worst of both worlds. They're not finding support at home, and they're feeling excluded from the military community. And they're like, where's my place? So my bottom line answer for that is go where you feel like you'll have community. And depending on your stage of life, for some people that is friends and family back home. And for other people, like when I said I chose to stay near our station and give birth there, I was entrenched in a very active moms group that I knew would help me out, would watch my kids, would bring me meals, would do anything that I needed in an emergency. And, you know, above and beyond, they offered things that I didn't even think to ask for. So I knew that that was where my community support was. And not that my parents couldn't have provided that, but it was just a different dynamic, and it would have been more disruptive to my family to do that. So you have to go where the community is. And I will add that there's a page in the deployment guide that is a worksheet to help you work through the pros and cons of living at home, living near the base. And it kind of leaves it open-ended so you can see the budget implications of each choice, and you can kind of see what you're going to be missing and what you're going to be getting depending which choice you make. And that way people can decide for themselves what's going to work out the best for them.
Perfect. I did not even know that's even in the guide. So I'm so glad you included that, because it is such a huge decision for so many people. And I just want to normalize that too. Like I think everybody going through a deployment has at least that moment where it kind of goes through your mind, like, what is best for us? Like, do I want to stay and tough this out here? What is for us here? And would it help us save money if I went home? Or like, I think it's a normal question that everybody asks. At least it goes through your mind, even if it just doesn't even make sense for you to go home. I think it's a normal question that just goes through your mind of, what could I do while he's gone? Right?
Always those what ifs, because there is always the possibility of saving money if you are basically able to live rent free with family back home and then sort of pocket the BAH. I mean, the service member is usually very supportive of that idea if that's what someone wants to do. And then there's also, just like I said, all the pros and cons that you think, what if I found a job? What if I didn't find a job? You have to consider, what would my life be like in each scenario? And it's hard.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, kind of on a little bit of a deeper level with you, maybe a way for us to kind of close out our conversation. When you look back over 7 deployments, and how many moves have you done? Do you know? I stopped counting myself personally. So
3, 4, 5. I think this was just our 5th.
5th. Okay. So let's say your 5th move and 7 deployments, and you've been married, I think you said 11 years, right? Yeah. So now looking back over 7 deployments, what would you say, what kind of growth have you gone through personally? What kind of depth has it added to your character? Does that make sense as a question?
I think that's a very good question. And I think probably, I don't think of myself that way, but probably I'm sure his deployments had a defining influence on who I am, and the fact that I want to encourage other people, because like I said, those first deployments were so hard and they were so isolating that I think that kind of left a mark. And I got through them. I mean, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like traumatized at the time, but I think looking back, I realized how alone I was and how unsupported I felt. And I didn't want anyone else to have to experience that. And so that has been a huge motivating fact, and part of the reason that I want to build this encouraging community for everyone. Like I said, regardless of whether it's girlfriend or fiance or boyfriend or fiance or spouse, that everyone should be able to find a supportive military community that can say, it's going to be okay, we've been there. So I think his early deployments challenged me to learn so much about myself. I was figuring out a lot on my own at that stage in life. I had graduated college, was working my first job, living on my own in my first apartment. It was just sort of a huge growth period. So to go through that on my own before we were married defined a lot about who I was as a person and how I entered our marriage, and probably who I am as a wife, because I wasn't fully dependent, as we'd say. I was a very independent person at that time. And I think his later deployments have really challenged me to be a problem solver, with being a homeowner and having kids, and just, something is always going wrong. And it has made me realize that I can never really be selfish and completely focused on myself, because my life is connected to all these people around me. And so I'm always kind of focused on our family and what they need and how to take care of them and encourage them and make life a little bit easier for them. So there's definitely been some tough moments, but it's forced me to reach out to other people, to ask for help, kind of break that humble, I can do anything attitude. And I have had moments where I've had to tell people I can't do everything. And I really need a mechanic or an expert or a babysitter or something. So I'm
So
sure.
I hear that, and I hear you being able to have more grace for yourself. You know, I think that we do initially come in after we kind of get into our battle rhythm of deployment, which we didn't really get a chance to talk about what that is. And you really can hit your stride in deployment where you feel like you've got your rhythm, the kids kind of have a routine. You kind of, doesn't mean that you feel that every single day, but you kind of start to feel like you're gaining confidence in this new normal. But what I've heard from you today is that you also learned how to be graceful with yourself, that even though you hit your battle rhythm and developed confidence of what you could do and having the right resources and the right organization around you, that your ability to go, I can't be everything. You know, I do need to ask for help. It's okay for my house to be not perfect. It's okay for my kids to not be perfect. That, I guess, embracing that level of grace for yourself, surely, a lot of these deployments was part of that experience and that growth for you.
I think so. I really love the way you put that, because that's more lovely than what I would have said to describe myself.
Doesn't feel graceful at the time, right?
No, I wouldn't say that I'm a graceful person, but I think you've hit on the fact that deployments kind of force you to choose what to hold on to and what to let go. And I mean that on an emotional level, on a physical level, on just like so many things that I think without deployments or, you know, everyday military life challenges, that we could kind of coast along maintaining the status quo. And that is in our jobs and in our relationships and in a lot of things. And deployments kind of throw you up against that wall where it's, you know, do or die. And in those moments, you find your true friends, you find your true strengths, your own talents, and you also learn what you're not good at. And you have the ability, and I like that, the grace to just say, you know what, that's not my thing. And I'm not going to be that person. And it's cool that somebody else, you know, posted that picture or does that or is accomplished in that area. That's not me. And I'm okay with that. I think as a younger, more insecure person, I felt like, you know, a good military spouse needs to do this and this and this, and I need to be this and this as a wife. And, you know, we have all these expectations on ourselves. And now I have a little bit more freedom to say, you know what, I know that I am the wife that my husband needs. I know that I'm the mom that my kids need. Doesn't mean I'm perfect every day. But I do know my own abilities. And then I know my areas where I'm not going to be, you know, what somebody else would consider amazing and wonderful. Like we talked about crafting and Pinterest and stuff. I'm okay with admitting that that's not my strength. And I think deployments have sort of given me that permission to be the mom that I need to be and to be the wife that I need to be without using other people's social media or other people's pictures to kind of put these expectations on my shoulders.
So well said. And I still, even though my kids are older, it still stands out to me. You know, there were seasoned spouses that were in my life at various points right when I needed it, that gave me the wisdom that I needed for that day. And so that's why I think that for me, that community is so important when you can tap in. If you're National Guard, you know, or your reserves, and you don't feel like you have that sense of community, I'm going to highly, highly encourage you to go to it's seasonspouse.com, right? And go to Lizann's website and join the Facebook group, because there is, I hear all the time that National Guard and Reserve don't have the level of support that they really need. And this is a great place for you to find it. Because there were seasoned spouses that interjected their wisdom at various points right when I needed it, on the day and the moment that I needed it. And one was the one that I shared earlier, where I was frustrated, and she said, if you're that frustrated, then go be a part of changing it. Doesn't mean that you're like running people over and causing problems. It just means get involved and make it better. Bring your talent, bring your strength to the equation, and see, maybe somebody actually just needs your help. Maybe it's not perfect because they need other volunteers. But I remember there was another seasoned spouse during a very intense part of our deployment who just said, it's okay to give your kids Cheerios tonight. Like, you don't even have to even go so far to make nuggets. Like, I remember there were some nights that just putting nuggets in the oven for 15 minutes was almost too much, right? I know that sounds crazy, but those of you who've been through it understand. And there was something, it sounds like such a basic thing for her to just throw out there. But for me, it was the exact moment that I needed it. I just needed another seasoned spouse who wasn't going to judge me, right? That just was going to say, your kids are going to be fine. Like, give them some Cheerios and get them to bed so that you can rest. Like, that's more important. Make the awesome meal tomorrow, but tonight, just give them Cheerios. It's going to be fine.
And I think that is huge. Like I said, pulling back that curtain and not putting on the mask of, we're great, we're strong, we can do anything. Because I think military spouses can do anything, but we also all have our challenging moments and our weaknesses. So pulling back that curtain and saying, you know what, yeah, sometimes it is cereal for dinner or frozen pizza, mac and cheese 3 nights a week. Like, sometimes there have been periods of my life where that's what we did. And I did not do that every day for years, but there were definitely times when that was reality. And it's okay to show that to other people so that other military spouses don't have this expectation of like, well, I saw a health blog that says you need to cook, fresh meals 5 nights a week for your kids. And that's just not realistic.
It's too much.
In that moment, in that situation, that's really not fair to be placing that weight on another spouse's shoulders for no reason. So
I think that also goes back to what you said at the very beginning, that there were days that you had a bad day and that you just made it a point to make sure that it didn't become a bad week or even a bad couple months, right? So being able to give ourselves that grace to go, this was a really bad day, or this was a really bad couple of days, that me and my kids can survive through those couple of bad days. But I'm also going to set that short-term and long-term goal that you also talked about, to say, I'm going to set a goal that says by the end of the week, I'm going to do what I need to do to take care of myself so that I'm not turning this into macaroni and cheese for the next 3 weeks.
Exactly. And that's what I think is the beauty of having goals, that if you do trip up, if you have a bad day or you're kind of in a slump or whatever, you don't just throw the whole goal out the window and say, okay, I guess I can't do it. You say, okay, but like you said, by the end of the week or by the end of the month, here's where I'm trying to get to. And then I'll just take those baby steps that I need to along the way. So if that means cereal once and then next week, not cereal, there you go. That's the baby step that you've accomplished. But it's things like that. When you look at it from that perspective, you're going to feel so much more confident and secure in your decision-making, in your problem-solving abilities. Whereas any of us, I think, as moms, as wives, regardless of deployments, we could beat ourselves over the head all the time of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I don't do X, Y, and Z. And that's not really serving any purpose. If that's not motivating you, then that's just hurting.
Lizann, I'm so thankful that you've put all of this together for so many people. We still have so many deployments that are actually happening, so many people that need this wisdom. And I'm so glad that you have embraced your role as a seasoned spouse. I would definitely say that you are one. You have so much wisdom to offer. Those of you who are listening, you can find out more about her deployment masterclass at seasonedspouse.com. You can also find her on Facebook and Twitter. And I highly recommend everything that she's doing to provide the resources and tools and wisdom that you guys need to be able to feel like you can confidently get through a deployment. And what I think is bonus here is to also give you the support that you need in a community. So Lizann, thank you for what you're doing, not only for the Deployment Masterclass, but the way that you're giving your talents through writing, and your presence online has been so encouraging to all of us. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Corey. It has been such a pleasure to be with you and talk about deployments from the other side, and to look back and realize that I have something to share with the community. So I hope that those listening have been encouraged, and come and find me on any of my pages on my Instagram too. So I will see you around.
Thanks for listening to the Life Giver podcast. If you're enjoying these conversations as being free of advertising or sponsorship, please help me by spreading the word to other military and first responder families that might benefit from the show. If you'd like to find out more about me or Life Giver, you can find more information at www.coreyweathers.com or life-giver.org.